And I asked our facilitators to work with me on this workshop because we have a recent but very rich history of our own collaboration, which has taken a particular form. Louise LaChapelle and Deborah Newmark are collaborators with me, but they also collaborate amongst themselves and have been for some time. They work in the area of community intervention and arts. Deborah is a performance artist and a scholar, and Louise works in the area of ethics, and she's also a scholar and researcher. And so I'm not going to tell you too much about them, except to say that we met first in the context of a community art program, a workshop in which they were trying to get participants in this program to think more critically about collaboration in the process of making community-based video documentary film or documentary video. And so they asked me. I was honored and very intrigued by this invitation, and I participated, and I talked to them about the question of power in dynamics of power in collaborative settings, using mostly ethnographic examples, but also talked to them about film. And there was a kind of a chemistry that happened. We seemed to be reading the same authors and talking about some of the same issues, and had a lot in common, even though we come from totally different backgrounds culturally and disciplinarily. And so when it came time for me to organize a workshop, the first people that I thought of were Louise and Deborah. And so we've put together a relatively structured program because the structure of the program has a lot to do with the kind of outcomes and results that we can expect, even though it's very clear that the outcomes are not predetermined. It's kind of the possibilities that structure creates, which I find interesting what they set up. So I'm not going to talk for too long. I just wanted to thank you both for being here and for all of the efforts you put into organizing this little session. The only thing I will say about this session is that we're going to ask you to work together as individuals, in small groups, and then as one larger group. And we're asked you to think about intersubjectivity in terms of your own individual or collective practice. And we're going to do something. We're going to do something. Yes. Yeah, we talked about that. Do we have time for everyone to stand up and say their name so people can be identified, or maybe just to stand up quickly and say your name so we can identify? Start here. Name and affiliation, or maybe just name. That's a no.
James Peterson.
Loki Pandey. Everybody calls me Loki.
Loki.
Jean-Guy Goulet.
Jean-Guy Goulet.
Corey Kratz.
Nancy Chen.
Shelley Arrington.
Alex Inkerly.
Say it again.
Alex Inkerly.
Alex.
Eric Gable.
Didn't get your name.
Pascal Godet.
Look at that.
Véronique Audet. Madeleine Séguin.
Alexandrine Boudreau-Fournier.
Denis Martin.
Mathieu Ritz.
Ons Barnett.
Blair Rutherford.
Annapurna Pandey.
Virginie Derouet. Sylvie Poirier. Sierra Satsuka. Christine Jourdain.
Emmanuel Foucault. Louise and Deborah.
Thank you. So, it's been given to me to begin. I wanted to begin by thanking Bob for this wonderful invitation. Louise and I were talking earlier, and I pointed out that we have often collaborated in working on material that emerges from my own practice. We've also collaborated on material that emerges from Louise's practice, and this is the first time that we're actually collaborating on material that emerges from somebody else's practice. And so that's I just realized this, and I thought that might be something to put on the table to begin with. Challenging, yes. I think it helps that we've also collaborated in previous time so that there's a dialogue, there's a conversation that we're in the
Share it
middle of.
fast.
On the table, you'll each find a short piece of paper that looks like this. And this is kind of the outline that we're going to work with. So I was just going to start by pointing out the objectives of this particular workshop. We would like to invite everyone in the room to have a greater sense of familiarity with one another's approaches to intersubjectivity. We'd also invite you to highlight some of the salient understandings of intersubjectivity, your key questions and challenges. Some of that started to come out today, this morning. And many of us who are in the room are not necessarily the ones who's also had given voice this morning. So there'll be a lot of space for other voices to be heard and other understandings and questions and challenges. And the third objective is to identify inconsistencies, contradictions, and blind spots in the practice. And so that's a chunk to ask for one activity in the afternoon, but we're going to try and do this, and I'll explain a little bit more the means by which we'll draw this out after Louise talks a little bit about the structure of the workshop itself.
So you have to understand that these objectives came out of our common discussion of common practices, so we're not imposing them on you guys, but we worked them through with Bob. And there were also objectives that we shared, or mainly questions that we shared about intersubjectivity. So this is really a working proposition, and we all have to be conscious that it's very tight in time, and we know that. So bear with us, be playful about it if we sometimes push a bit harder so that we just go on and try to make it to what's our last activity, which will be an exhibition actually. We're in an art gallery, so we took it very seriously. We're very serious people. And so this is a working proposition, and so hopefully you'll find there some material to work with towards the rest of your meeting. And so, as Deborah pointed out, the plan is to open questions. Many of them have already been opened, but also build on what we've been opening this morning and maybe build that materially. You see that we've put some material on your tables, and we'll be adding materials to your tables. So basically, the structure of the workshop is in 3 parts, and in each part we'll be starting from questions that have come up in our discussions, but also in the readings that we've done, because you had the generosity to put up the papers, so we've been working with your own materials also. And so in each step of this workshop will be, as Bob said earlier, working individually and then sharing that work in small groups and then bring that sharing back to a plenary discussion. And so each time we'll be going back to our questions by adding layers and layers to the reflection, as we'll be adding layers and layers to the work. So I'll let Deborah introduce this material part of it.
So it's really, for me, when I was thinking about this, how can I describe what we're attempting to create? It's really, for me, the language of a sketch. It's very different than a drawing or a painting, right? We're in an art gallery. While this art gallery often goes beyond the boundaries of painting and drawing into performance art and all kinds of other different art forms, the idea of a sketch comes to mind. And so the first material that you have is a sheet of paper folded in half. And the reason why it's folded in half, for those of you who might feel more comfortable to work on the wall, is that the gallery has asked us to have a double sheet so that there isn't any marking of the wall. We have tape. You can actually pin your thing up to the wall and work on the wall. You can work on the floor. You can work at the tables. And we ask you to work with, for the first part, to work with 2 different colors. So there are markers on the table. Choose 2 different colors. And the first part of this is located in this question of representing and situating intersubjectivity. So if you could, with 1 marker, represent the stages of your research process. In however you represent that, whatever this sheet of paper, that's the format that we're going to use, however you want to use that, how would you represent the stages of your research process, and then, using a different color, situating within that process the places in which intersubjectivity is alive. I'm not saying alive and well, I'm just saying alive. Okay? And there'll be about 5 minutes. So this is a real crunching idea, moving out from all of what we've been speaking about today to locate this for yourself. What are the stages of your process, and where do you locate intersubjectivity in any one of those stages along the process?
When you say representation, it's in words or in images or?
It's your representation.
Yeah.
Right?
Mixed media.
It makes it
Really, and we're deliberately leaving that to you to decide how you create that map. Where are you who talked about the mapping just earlier?
it might even not be mapped.
It might not be mapping. So that's one possible representation.
It's your party.
Okay, so there's 5 minutes. Yes, there's a question in the back.
We're doing this individually, or do you want one?
This is individually. For now, your first exercise is to do this individually.
5 minutes.
5 minute exercise. And I will be a little bit annoying with the time. Okay?
I don't know about that, but I think I should move. Yeah, I don't need such a big thing. Yeah. We can pull
Right, stages.
Stages. Oh,
This is a challenge.
I was thinking of something, but it's too abstract.
Well, the trouble is I can't draw.
Me too.
But that's the point. I think because nobody knows how to.
Si vous avez des questions en français, n'hésitez pas de demander des informations. On peut aussi faire des traductions en français. If you need more space, feel free to tack your paper to the wall and work on the wall or on the floor. The stages and where you situate intersubjectivity in those stages. It's really a sketch. Process and where he locates intersubjectivity in those stages.
The manual is starting to get a little bit jittery. I need to hover around here. We have a couple more, about 1 minute left.
You continue to make conditions.
This is an ongoing process.
Okay, so what I'm introducing now is the instructions for the next step. So the next steps brings you to present what you've drawn, to present what your representation to your fellow colleagues, the people sitting at your table. You'll have 15 minutes to share what you've all done. Okay. At your table.
So one person
And
for
so
each
one
table.
person at each table will report on this first sharing. So what you can aim towards is first of all looking at your representation. So what are the phases that you've identified? Where do you locate subjectivity? What are the similarities, differences between your representation? We can even go into the ways, the shapes you've given to those representations, the language that you've used. And we're starting to enter into the questions. So if we think of intersubjectivity, who are the subject? Can you identify the subjects? Can you start to make the nature of the relationships? So I'm introducing those elements in your discussion, and so that you can introduce each other to your work. I'm not saying probably, but I'm sure you got it. So you have 15 minutes for this part of the sharing. But please first identify who will report, because you want one person to be aware of what's being said around the table and how they will be shared. We'll have 15 minutes.
For my own, well, I've been thinking about, it's a bit fragmentary, and I've been thinking mostly about the sub-steps of all the steps from, home and field and that kind of back and forth. And one thing I notice is that the more intersubjective moments are interspersed. I don't find a clear pattern, but there are times where clearly there's not. Sometimes there's intersubjectivity that's fancier, and sometimes it's really direct based on the interactions that are in presential.
So I'm curious what you would maybe hold up what you would. So I'm just curious what you
Yeah, okay, so, well, the initial idea is about doing a project or something, just exploring the subject by doing some reading and project design and some logistics, preparing for the field, the first contact that might be outside of
You talking and everyone that
their elders and between me and the children. Yeah.
And using the children as your ambassadors.
To the elders in the society, because I have a different kind of relation with them, and I have a different kind of relation with the children.
And doing work in health and actually getting an understanding that people are dying, and predominantly around HIV.
Okay.
And so then there's the going out and talking to individuals to really get a sense of what's going on out in the then talking to groups, these be community groups, intellectual groups, and then publishing.
Wow.
And the intersubjectivity there is at different stages of how to, one, get the information, and then also here, part of my thinking is that intersubjectivity don't exist with the people interaction. It exists also as ethnographers with interaction with the written material.
Wow. Well, what I find really fascinating is both of you actually wrote literally figurative experiences, like totally see looking at the generational aspect, as well as for working in a medical center.
So when you talk together, how do the negotiations go?
But how about that you are also part of this myth making? He himself, because he studied this
back in the 60s.
And he has become part of the myth that in fact these people they are saying the data
I'm the wrong time, sir.
foreign anthropologists.
Sorry, really?
So it's kind of
How did the people you're saying relate to you, someone from Marissa, compared to him? Are you from similar background?
And one of the things, I guess, in a sense of convergence is that the process.
This is really listening to us and people to be resistant. Being dedicated, being silent for 4 or 5 hours. Not be bothered by it all. Generations you're meditating in a way. Listening to each other.
It's a different kind of
You have hands down, You did not have hands in
No, they're not mine. It's okay, we're almost done. Yeah, we're so good. All right.
Who is that?
Sorry?
Who is that?
That's cool. Basically, what I got, this person is the anthropologist, this orange person. He or she encounters this other person who they don't know. And they need to imagine that they know that person somehow embodies their own self, the sense of who that other person is. And that sense entails various kinds of emotions. And then this person becomes less visible to them.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so again, I have the job of interrupting you, please.
Right, exactly.
Kids! Pay attention now!
Yes.
So, again, we decided to present what came out of this sharing. Of course, what are the differences and the similarities in the representations that you drew of your own research process? Also, what are the similarities and differences between where you locate intersubjectivity? But we're also bringing it a bit further on putting a focus on starting to identify who are the subjects and what kind of relationships are we talking about. And as we didn't mention so far, Deborah just pointed to me that I should do it now. Our role in this conversation is, and it's very presumptuous, we'll be trying to complexify the issues as we go on and trying to open it. So please bear with us in doing that. So each of the person that will be reporting has 2 minutes, so that we can also ask around once the report is done, if anyone in the group wants to add something. And so we're really putting questions and working material on our common working table. Nancy?
It might be helpful whenever the reporter reports some of the other people on the table show what was drawn.
And it would be very interesting, indeed. So I don't know if you all understood Nancy's invitation. So may you repeat?
Yep. So I was suggesting, in addition to the reporter, when the reporter is summarizing what was discussed, perhaps everyone could hold up their representations. I'm just curious to see what people drew. So it would be really fun.
And just so that you'll, well, maybe I shouldn't give this.
Okay.
Okay, no, I'll leave that for later. Okay. Table number, which is table number one?
Come on down.
Self-select.
So I guess it's yours.
Points that intersubjectivity in the field, when it happens, it doesn't happen with everyone on the field. So she has these drawings and she has little clouds of intersubjectivity, but they're not everywhere. And I kind of did the same thing with my drawing, where I tried to make some people intersubjective, but it didn't quite happen for everybody. We had some disagreement with respect to when we read a book, an anthropology book, as part of our, is that intersubjective? I mean, we're being influenced by the author, but if the author's dead even, he's not going to be influenced by us. So I thought that was intersubjective. Tak didn't think that was intersubjective. Alexandrina had also the anthropologist growing ears and arms as the process came along. So she had the process of self-transformation. She was the only one that had that, I think. Eric was the most theoretical. He had the egg metaphor, where you start out with yellow and white, and then the anthropologist becomes white with some yellow inside of him. And then he goes and he tries to give yellow to other people, which are other anthropologists at conferences or students when you teach. He was also, like me, pointing out that when you have a conference or when you go teaching, that's another place for intersubjectivity. And Vero was interesting because she started with this notion of, and there's a lot of other things, but utopia, where she got into anthropology to this utopic vision, which I would say is an intersubjective vision, a utopic vision of intersubjectivity and world harmony even. And also she was interesting because she acted as a broker, and she brought in, she actually was a vehicle for some Burkinabés, some people from Burkina Faso, to meet with Innu people. And so she was the only one that had intersubjectivity that she kind of created, but that was not between her and someone else. So that was it.
Pascal, do you want to check with your group if someone has something to add?
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
That's good.
Oh yeah, thank you. You said that's not intersubjective if it's not face to face.
Thank you. Great. Next.
And obviously I'm not necessarily less afraid of misrepresenting my colleagues than I am misrepresenting anybody else, but I will do my best. what I noticed, not necessarily disagreements, but differences in terms of going from the completely continuous, as Jean-Guy did, in terms of the process, a completely continuous process that involves all his fieldworks in different projects, to a very discontinuous one, which was mine, that was very hereditary in step-by-step fashion, and two in between that are basically the broader steps that also are still steps, but with a little bit more continuity. Within that, there was a notion that intersubjectivity could be present at every step, or alternating between being present or being more or less present. There was a lot of talk about, well, obviously co-presence, absence, and things like that, obviously. And also a discussion about language, the role of language in terms of its intersubjectivity. If language enables intersubjectivity, if it forces intersubjectivity in the sense that it's not an accurate representation, and in terms of using language as a tool, it might, in a way, force us to locate intersubjectivity. So intersubjectivity is both ubiquitous and also, varying through time. Anything else?
Is there someone who has something to add? No? I know we've been talking this morning about your job being to learn about the other, but I would really invite you to listen to each other and learn about yourself and bring that back to your own table and pick on each other's work and be opportunist about it. What can you take there and open up your own stuff with it and continue the reflection? As I said earlier, we'll be building on these representations as we go on.
I'm glad you said that. Our discussion was quite interesting. We started out with talking about our work in bringing it from personal experiences, and Nancy, being a surfer, kind of used the terms catching the waves and staying afloat in her research. And Loki talked being a family man, talked about dealing with the children in terms of using the children to get to understanding the adults and allowing the adults to provide entree for him into a specific community. And as Nancy kind of talked about staying afloat and looking at news and stories and using the metaphor of the surfboard and catching the wave. And myself, being a person from the inner city, kind of used the process and used public working and public health. And you can see I am an artist, I am not. But this kind of represents hospitals and people dying and talking to people. And I also kind of felt like that literature was a way of engaging into intersubjectivity. So bringing all that together, some commonalities that came out of those differences were we all kind of dealt with the community, people, places, and platforms and engagement, and we used our personal experiences in order to kind of work within that self-reflexive exercise.
The written language, if you say word about language. Yes.
Most important one, yes. And the way that we used our personal experiences to engage in the research process was to engage in a common language. And that was pretty much the intersubjective component of what we did to establish that communication.
Thank you, James. Thank you for pointing out that our representations come from who and where we are. So.
So I want to pick up on where you said representation starts with where we are. So this is a good example of what Aboriginal art is, and this is how Sylvie represents her thinking process. It's all in circles. But it's very interesting. The concentric circles and everything is related. The people, the places, the ideas, and all feed into each other in a way. And that's how she likes to think about it. You want to contrast with process, studying, letting herself and the ideas mushroom literally because it's a project about mushrooms, and everything is mushrooming here, and she doesn't know at the moment how things are going to pan out, but basically she goes with the flows that she is, and intersubjectivity takes place at every stage because of the relationship of place to space and to individuals, where Alberto here is interested in understanding the relationship between actually real speech with interlocutors and virtual speech through computers and the telephone, and all this showing that intersubjectivity, that is the presence with the informants, interlocutors, advisors, participants in the research, is essential in this step. So that's how he builds this. And so, but he joined the crowd very late, so. And I am very infantile in my representations. So a few steps here with brains and mouth and people at every step, and feedback, recursive feedback at every step, and more or less flexibity at every step. So basically what we can say is that all of us, none of us can draw. That we have a model sense of what actually is happening. We have a general sense, but we don't really know exactly what is happening, except that we try to make an effort to build in reflexivity, a sense of direction nevertheless, and to absorb in our thinking process what is really dominant in the places where we do research. Thank you. Green.
Great. Yeah, we different versions of ideas on intersubjectivity. Hans, who was more abstract in his thinking, from the Jean-Guy a bit, where but the colors are also important because he works on Garifuna music, and these two of the three Garifuna colors are here, and this being kind of the focus, the yellow, and his, as he put it, his intersubjectivity kind of goes back and forth. In a circle. Sometimes it's there, sometimes not, and it is a continuous process. Magda has the metaphor of an eye, which is quite exciting, in her work on Tangle. And she also emphasized the coming together, people separate, and then they come together and counter each other, then they do the dance, the tangle, and then but they end up apart, and they keep, the important part of recognizing being intersubjective is also to recognize yourself at the end as an individual, as an I, as a subject, which was a very interesting point. Anna Piuna had talked about collaborative research projects she's involved with, and talked about the relationships, first of all, between the three of them, very different positionings, between anthropologists who worked in Orissas, state in the 60s, who's now going back, a filmmaker, and herself in her home state, and the different ideas of what the research is about for these three different people, and the negotiations amongst themselves about what the project is about, and then encountering in the field again negotiations amongst themselves, and her own position as also a translator in her home field, and at the same time being collegial with her partners, and then at the end, how the writing up stage, and again the negotiations, the intersubjectivity between the three of them as they're trying to write up and come up to an idea of what they're writing about. Myself, like another great drawer, as you heard, I do work on farm workers. We all talk about gatekeepers. Well, on commercial farms, you literally have a gate, usually with barbed wire fence on there, jagged, broken glass on the walls around it. To get through the gates, you have to get through the guard who is responsible ultimately to the farmer, the manager, the person behind the gate. So you have to negotiate with that. Then you get into the farm compound where many of the farm workers live, where it's done with the farms, and you have different types of houses, different positioning, different farm workers, typically between management workers and your general workers and your seasonal workers, and so forth. You have to negotiate the different hierarchies between, to talk to people, let alone to understand. And then, similar to a couple of you already talking about different other audiences, different publics you talk about. So that's in the classroom if you're an academic, talking to students, but it's not just you and the students, but it's you and your colleagues, you and your department chair, you and your administrators, all these other relationships that you have to negotiate with. Then in your publications, not only the readers of the publications, but the people who control the publications. Be it the publishers, be it the editors, so forth. And the same as if you go on TV or radio, you've got other sets of relationships which you're negotiating, both the audience but also the people doing production. So similar, we have similar issues, but also some differences in terms of how we're thinking about intersubjectivity, in terms of some of us really saw it as stages and others see it as more flowing process. Anyone want to add anything else?
Thank you. You wanted to
just
mention
continue
towards
the second part, but I'm picking up on something that was said in your group first about the fact that if there's an intersubjectivity, there's a subject, there's an I. And this morning we've heard a lot, or I've heard, I should say, a lot of we's. We speak as the discipline, and so that's another kind of I, collective I. We talked about collective intersubjectivity also. But there's a clear invitation in what we're proposing here to speak from that I. And I think that's what I was pointing out when you were showing the different representations that you've all sorted from a subjective place, from where you come from. And I'm very fascinated by where Christine took it, which the example, you bounced on what I was saying, and the example you gave was Sylvie's representation, which was a native's drawing. So what's that I about? And how is that representation her own subjectivity, a representation of her own subjectivity? Maybe it's a representation of her professional subject, but I'm just throwing this as a ball you can play with also. So I also noticed that we've spoken about situating. Deborah, you summarized it very well. Started speaking about where we locate intersubjectivity, but not many of you went into who are the subjects and what kind of relationship, and so maybe we bring that a little further in the next phase of our workshop. So if you look at your own working plan, you see that this next step brings us, and you're continuing to work on your own representation, but we've added material on your tables. So our next question would be, what are the conditions, whether those conditions are theoretical or experiential?
I'm going to go walk. I'm going to go back to the hotel to get some. Huh?
So you're the plenary.
I copied the map.
So you'll be recorded.
Then we have conditions and characteristics.
And then the spokesperson will bring that to the plenary, and again, you can have your map, your representations with your post-its all drawn out, and so we can take a look at the different representations about where on your representation already you're also including these questions of conditions and characters. Okay? 15 minutes for this next part of the conversation amongst you. Okay? Yeah.
Included both of your ideas in the sense that I still think that intersubjective moment is something that is relationship when you're face to face. So the fieldwork experience of you, like this is me meeting the other who is kind of like a monstrous being with the horns, and you sort of kind of get contagious and contract the monstrous thing where you're kind of confused and you write about it or something and you kind of grow. And I think the process is sort of like...
So what I basically added is just two stickies, one for conditions and one for, what the hell was the other thing? Characteristics. Okay, and I kind of linked it with the heads of people. And for conditions, I have openness, willingness, a certain energy or momentum, and talkativeness. So basically, I think you have to be, in order for intersubjectivity to happen, you have to want to have an exchange. There has to be a will. There has to be an openness to other points of view, especially in anthropology, because you will be confronted. You're not with the choir, so to speak. You're talking with someone which will have very different views than you will. And you have to kind of want to reach, kind of an energy. And the other person has their own energy. And so those are conditions. They are...
And when these veterans came back, they really were very disturbed with the kind of knowledge of their culture and society which was available in the outside world because of anthropologists, and how their own situation was very compromised, how they were really represented in the anthropological texts. So after that, they started to say no more anthropology. And as a result, anthropologist after anthropologist, beginning with John Gray, beginning with Omar Stewart, who was a student of Roberts from Berkeley, then John Roberts, who had come from Yale, then John Gray.
And culture that's really happening.
No, equality is not happening, and
but it could. I mean, it's
all the time.
It's what we, as a characteristic of intersubjectivity, somehow we're aiming at equality.
Yes, but I think there's some moments that we feel we achieve that, but I think it's really contingent and temporal.
Yeah. More than equality, I would probably talk about creating a level plane, a plane on which all of us can interact. So I think part of the coevalness thing and part of my concept of opening the door and the road is really to create a
Where are we?
Là, il est en train de gagner. Il avait déjà blessé l'autre plusieurs fois. L'autre capitaine, il disait c'est le rouge qui gagne. Tout à coup, dans un éclair, le blanc s'est levé en l'air avec ses deux pattes, il a tranché la gorge de l'autre, là, de tombe mort. Alors, il avait un camp de mort.
Il a tranché la gorge, mais
parce qu'ils ont des groupes.
avec les épaules.
Non, ils ont des groupes. Là, c'est ça, c'est comme des groupes. Donc là, le camp est mort. Le propriétaire du coq là, que tu es rouge, prend le coq là, il se met à courir. Tout le monde qui était le troisième venait de sortir son fusil, tirait sur celui qui s'enfuyait avec son coq qui avait gagné. La balle est passée entre deux. Moi, j'aurais pu mourir là parce que je ne comprenais pas qu'il y avait beaucoup d'argent débloqué dans sa colère. Mais en même temps que tout ça arrivait, il y avait une femme qui était montée sur la molette, qui sautait sur le dos du gars avec le revolver. Il a tiré son revolver de telle manière que le coup est allé plus bas que normalement il serait allé. Donc, acheter son
Something happened so longer with the subject, because if not, it just goes on, life just continues. But if you just stop and then think about what I learned from someone that happened with my relation with someone, then that's how it is. I think intersubjectivity places
and bring your ideas generously towards the larger group. I guess what's being shared and who is doing the sharing. And someone else, Fabian, I think, what work is expected of us? And he would say, by whom and why? And then what can they ask of us? And then how can we switch that around and also...
But the story got shoved to the side. So this time, he decided to go over there and work.
I was there before.
Oh, you were there before, I'm sorry. Okay, so he was there before. You were there too?
But you didn't notice it.
Yeah, I didn't notice it. He told me to notice. I thought he mentioned you can change this if you like. But that when he came back to the table, what was fascinating was that the group of us here who ostensibly were working separately were in fact, in a very peculiar way, kind of slightly imitating one another in our forms. Now, I don't know if that's quite true or not, but that was his contribution, which I think is an incredibly valuable contribution, myself at least, because it gets to some of the other issues of this intersubjectivity that we started to talk about, which has to do with we chose maybe as our emblem co-apprentissage as our kind of apprentissage, co-apprentissage. Okay, which was what a kind of utopian vision of what intersubjectivity would be about. And it would be multiple. There would be many levels of it. But getting there is a different, and we each had slightly different stories about how to get there. But